and welcome to Life After Divorce podcast. And I'm your host, Patricia Lavigne, and I'm a separation and divorce coach. I'm so happy you're here to join us today. And I decided to do a 10 series discussion with 10 people asking 10 questions regarding their experience of divorce. I feel it's really important for new people who are going through divorce to have some hope and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm really excited to invite Karen as our guest today. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, Patricia. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to do this.
That's great, Karen. And as you know, I created 10 questions and I'm going to be asking them to you. And I'd love you to just share your story.
Of
So
course.
the first one I ask is, how long has it been since your divorce?
So my ex-husband and I, we separated 19 years ago, so in 2002.
Uh-huh. So how was your marriage like, Karen?
Well, I think to be honest, at the beginning, it was quite good. I would almost say we were the envy of our friends. We were compatible in a lot of ways. We both had an adventure-seeking personality. So I think we were kind of known in our peer group as that couple that had a lot of fun, did a lot of things together, seemed really happy. And I was like embarking on my married life. And it was a very exciting time for me.
Mm-hmm. And what happened during the marriage that it ended?
I mean, I work as a therapist, so I have kind of the theory, like the theoretical knowledge of what can happen. And we did do counseling at one point to try and figure it out. So that informed me not only in terms of the work that I continue to do with couples, but it made a lot of sense to me what was happening between my ex-husband and I. So in a nutshell, how I think I would explain it is whether we talk about type A, type B, you know, more tightly wound, more easygoing, I think we did invite each other into our lives for that deeper psychological purpose where I remember being very attracted to his easygoing nature and very chill, very laid back, very relaxed. But as we know from a lot of the theory, what we attract is what we need, but we get easily frustrated by it. So I became increasingly more frustrated with his relaxation, which became for me a point of being irresponsible or unaccountable or very passive aggressive styles of communication. And I think probably, and I've never really talked this through with him, but I think that my more kind of alertness and taking care of things almost instantaneously, I think that was invited into his life to maybe encourage him to be more organized or more accountable. But what ended up happening, which is pretty classic, we just ended up pushing each other's buttons over many, well, I want to say many years. I think we were together in the end about 7.5 years. So it was kind of that slow burn of pushing each other's buttons. And I became increasingly more frustrated by what I thought was a lack of responsibility or poor communication. And I'm sure I pushed his buttons by thinking, like, why couldn't I just relax more and just go with it?
Mm-hmm.
And so that became increasingly harder between us.
Yeah, and I've had these conversations about opposites attract or, compatibility. And I always say that that's something you want to look for in the next person is what is compatible. Like you're right. What pushes your buttons? What pushes mine? And let's figure that out before we kind of get it too far deep into this relationship. So you're absolutely right on that. So looking back, what would you have done differently?
The scenario that I just described got worse because I was in a very high stress job at the time. And then we had our first child together and she was colicky. And so the stress on me from work plus the sleep deprivation that was serious ended up causing major health concerns for me. So the crisis in our marriage ultimately was that increasing frustration that I just described earlier, plus a health crisis for me where I was out of work and I miscarried another child and lost my health. So I was in my own personal crisis. So I think looking back on it, those increasing frustrations that we were having just became explosive because of the crisis that I then found myself in. And I remember us going to a chiropractor that was treating me at the time. And I remember the chiropractor looking at my ex-husband and going, don't forget to get support for yourself too, because now he was also dealing with caregiver stress on top of all those other frustrations. And it's like we knew we needed help, and we did try different counseling at the time, but it just kept spiraling out of control. And the arguments and conflicts just kept getting worse. I mean, it's easy, I think, to look back now and go, I wish we would have just like completely stopped and committed in a much more serious way to figuring it out, because I think there was a lot of potential. There was also an issue that was haunting us from our dating years that neither of us ever dealt with. And I think when I look back on how I didn't deal with that, like right from the very beginning, it was a self-esteem and confidence issue for me. So I think we had haunting from the past, increasing frustrations of our different personalities, and then my health crisis that turned me in upside down, and him as well. And I think, you know, in either of those three places, whether we needed more confidence, we needed like a bigger reality check to somebody to force us just to stop, to realize how serious it was getting. And I think we were just both kind of going along. You'd go through your day, you're just trying to get to the end of the day, whatever that day looked like at that point, without really stopping enough to zoom out and get a bigger picture to say, if we don't deal with this, it is going to completely fall apart, and it'll be just a bigger nightmare than what we're dealing with now. And I think that would have taken, like, I guess at one point, more confidence, more mindfulness, to just really tune into the present and really get honest with ourselves and each other, that if we don't take care of this, we are out of control. Like, it's going to fall apart.
Yeah, and I understand that, because I think what happens is a lot of people get married, and when they go into a marriage, they're going in for the other person, opposed to looking at themselves and saying, what about me? What do I need to do for me? As in, am I in a good place? Do I need help? Do I have some insecurities? And if they are, what are they? And I need to work on those. So I think when a person separates and divorce, that goes into the sort of discussion saying, give yourself some chance, give yourself time to sort of recover and discover who you really are. So I find
Yeah,
that,
I think, yeah, definitely one of the turning points was when we hit that issue in our dating life. I remember at the time feeling a lot of pressure. I don't think it was intended pressure from anybody, and some pressure even from myself, like, okay, like we should get married. You know, I've got the career now. I get married, have the children, get the house. And it did really start feeling like I was living in a semi-conscious way of just like ticking off boxes,
mhm.
rather than facing the reality and not being so afraid to face that reality of what we were dealing with, to say, there probably is a way to deal with this. But I remember thinking, maybe because of my insecurities or my lack of confidence, it was too rigid. It felt like it was like, okay, I'm either marrying this guy or I'm not. And it felt very rigid. And I think it was also maybe a lack of maturity on my part at the time, coupled with a lack of confidence, because then I think if I would have said, well, maybe there's a way of dealing with this, and it doesn't have to be yay or nay. But I remember feeling this kind of pressure from behind saying, okay, you found the guy, you know, you're more or less compatible, you know, I'm half Ukrainian, so like, let's plan the big fat Ukrainian wedding, get the house and get the baby, and we're all set. And I really think to this day, had we managed that initial piece differently, we would have still frustrated each other with our different personalities. But I think there was a lot of underlying internalized strife for both of us. that just hung over us. It just held the relationship hostage.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Do you think you should have reached out for maybe some help or additional support after you had the breakup, the marriage, the divorce, or?
I had started with a therapist when I first started getting sick from the job that I had at the time. And I still see her to this day.
Mhm.
And so I continued to see her. And I brought in other marriage counselors at the time. And when the marital and couple relationship ended, I continued with my own therapist. And that was a lifeline for me, as were my parents and some good friends. So I feel like I did get a lot of support afterwards, which was a saving grace for me.
Yeah, that's great because it really is important to get some support or some sort of help, because if you don't, you get stuck and you're not able to move forward, right? So, and how did your children react to the divorce? Or you have one child, right? Your daughter?
Yeah, I have one daughter. She's 22, so she was 3 at the time, and I remember signing us both up for support groups. So in addition to the individual therapist, we started going to our own. I went to the partners group, and she went to the children's group, and she I guess in the early stages, she was too young to really know what was happening. Now I talk to her and she remembers some things. I stayed in the house and her father left. And I tried to find a very simple way to describe it to her. And so in a neutral way. So I remember saying to her as she continued to grow up that um, I stopped listening and your father stopped talking.
Oh, wow.
And that made perfect sense to me because I know that as our conflicts increased, I was doing more yelling than listening, and he was doing much less talking.
Mhm.
Um, so that's how it broke down. So whether that was right or wrong, that was kind of my neutral way of trying to teach her that it was no one person's fault, that we both had responsibility, and that these were the key components in terms of the lessons for life of never kind of like holding yourself accountable to listening and talking.
Mhm.
And I remember buying her books and we did the group, and then eventually she started with her own therapist, and it definitely upset her development in the sense of dealing with the separation anxiety. She continued to go back and forth between both of our homes. And in those early years, my ex-husband moved a number of times. So I remember being quite concerned about the upheaval in terms of every time she went to see him for those early years, there were a lot of different environments.
And is she adjusting well now as an adult?
I think she's doing remarkably well. It's an ongoing dialogue in our family. We even had like a profound conversation this morning. She's in a long distance relationship right now, and her boyfriend is having a much harder time than she is because of COVID. She couldn't relocate to live with him. And so one of her friends actually said to her, do you think that you're doing better than he is? Because and this friend also grew up in a family of divorce. She said, because when we were growing up, we had to deal with the fact that if we were with one parent, we couldn't be with the other parent, and how to manage the anxiety of that. And so she said, yeah, maybe that's why you're doing so much better than he is now, because this is a familiar place to you. And in some ways, she's mastered it. She is so successful with COVID. She graduated. She got a full-time job. She opened her own business. And I've listened to how she talks about how to deal with the separation anxiety from her boyfriend. And she's like, well, we can't do anything about it. I can't go to where he is because of COVID. So I better just get on with my life. And I guess sometimes, some people would say, well, maybe that's too harsh, but it has given her a lot of resilience to be able to really focus on her life, dealing with this anxiety of not being able to be together with him.
Mhm.
And
Great.
so I'd like to think that that's added a positive component for her.
Mhm. Yeah,
Hmm.
that is good. That's really good to hear. What was the biggest challenge that you came across after the divorce for you personally?
For me, I was I was already in my health crisis of losing my health and my job. And once this happened, I definitely tailspin into major anxiety over just, Patricia, just having the sheer loss of control over my life. And I remember having severe anxiety at the time. And as I worked through my grief, feeling very high levels of shame about my contributions, and just feeling like completely lost in my world. And I would say it got to fairly desperate places for me.
Mhm.
And I use this story with my clients when it fits, is that I definitely remember feeling like completely giving up. And that's so not me. Like, I never give up. Sometimes I don't give up to a fault, but I remember thinking, I don't think I can do this. It's too much. I don't have my health. I don't have my job. I had lost a second child, and I remember the day when my ex-husband came, and they were going on our annual camping trip without me. And I was like, this is too overwhelming. And I remember getting to a fork in the road and thinking, okay, like, is this truly where I give up? And my parents were coming the next day. We were renting out my basement. My parents were coming the next day to help paint the walls of this apartment we were trying to make. And I remember thinking, okay, somehow I have to work this out. I have to get up in the morning and I have to help with the painting job. And as silly as that sounds, it's almost like that painting job saved my life, because I really thought I couldn't do it anymore. It was too painful.
Yeah,
And so that was the fork in the road.
when I talk to my clients, I tell them giving up is not an option. We're not going to give up here. We're going to keep going one step at a
Yeah.
time. Take it slow, even if it's a baby step. But giving up, we can't do this. We have to just keep going. So yeah,
Yeah,
and
I think that's good advice, because what happened for me when I hit that rock, or sorry, the fork in the road, with the rock, the fork in the road, maybe the fork was on a rock, but I remember, if I'm not giving up, if I'm truly, it felt like a total fork in the road at the moment. If I don't give up, then I am choosing this pathway to rebuild my life.
Mhm,
And because it's like, I didn't feel at that point life could have gotten any harder for me.
mhm.
And if it's going to be the very hardest, but I'm not going to give up, it was like something completely different opened up to me. And at that point, then I'm on that pathway, like, okay, if I'm truly not giving up and it's the hardest it'll ever get, then yeah, one step at a time. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna rebuild.
And I actually kind of describe it too as take it like it's one chapter. When you read a book, you read a chapter and then you might stop
Hmm.
for a while, but you always tend to want to get to the end of that chapter. So look at your life as always, it's one chapter at a time. And create that solution or whatever you need to do to get through that chapter. I find
Hmm.
that's a good method.
I think that's good advice, because it's too much if you look at it all, and then you just start to feel helpless and hopeless.
Yeah.
And you don't really know what that's going to look like. Like, you don't know what the last chapter of that book is,
That's right. But
right?
that's okay because if you call it a journey, I feel like that's like such a long road. Oh my, it's my journey. I've got to follow my journey in life. But journey is a long road ahead of you. To me, when I tell my clients and I say, just take it like one step at a time, one step at a time. It's like your chapter. You finish this chapter, you'll get to the next. And the book could
Yeah.
be, it doesn't matter how big the book is because you'll get there when you get there, you know?
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah.
and so how long did it take to finalize your divorce?
Oh gosh, you mean to actually have the legal divorce?
Yeah, to say like, okay, now the divorce is over.
I mean, we didn't sign off on the divorce papers, and I don't remember what year it was that because we stayed this is going to sound strange, but we stayed separated and not divorced to take advantage of health insurance benefits. And at a certain point, my career had turned around. His life had turned around. It had progressed. Sorry, and so we were just at a better place. He wanted to have health insurance for his new family, and my career was in a better place where I didn't need the family insurance anymore.
Mhm.
And so that's when I filed for divorce. But that was, I'm thinking at least, I think our daughter may have been even 10 years old, like 7 or 8 years. Yeah, it went on. But it didn't matter. Emotionally, we had separated, and we were into a rhythm of our new family. And, I remember even at the time that I filed for divorce and the divorce papers in, I actually went back to my parents and said, because they were storing my wedding dress and veil, and I said, can I just take the veil? I'm going to have a divorce party. And I think I should wear my wedding veil at our divorce party. But I think there had been so many years past, I honestly never threw the party. The veil is in my basement. I never wore it. Because it was like, it had gone on for so long and we were in a different place.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. A lot of people don't really rush into the divorce. And I think because mentally they've decided it's done, it's over. And if
Yeah,
and when that other time comes that I want to remarry, then I'll rethink it then or
exactly.
decide at that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so what advice would you offer to people who are going through a divorce? Do you have any advice for anyone?
After they've already decided they're getting a divorce,
Yeah. Yeah.
the bottom line is just for me, um, you can live the nightmare the rest of your life, right? You can stay depressed. You can stay grieving. You could literally treat it as a life sentence. But as you know, every loss comes with a life lesson. So the real power of getting over your divorce is to figure out what happened, like at a deeper level, so that you can identify the purpose, right? And to me, that's what sets you free because I think you have to make a takeaway. Like, what's your takeaway? Why did I go through this? What was going on for me that led me to that exact point where the marriage couldn't go on? Because now that's something I can have, like, that's empowering to me. And I think it could be empowering to others to figure that out because then you can say, okay, now what can I do about this? Because like nobody ever wants to go through that again, right? Nobody wants to repeat that pattern. And so for me, that's the kernel in all of this, because then you can not only get back to living, whether you have to take better care of yourself or change how you're thinking or, move or start a new relationship. But to me, what really matters is you better figure out what went wrong and what you need to do differently for yourself, because then you can get on top of it. Like for me, that's what ultimately helped me get on top of it. Otherwise, I was getting rolled over by it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because that's part of what I do when I'm teaching or when I'm coaching my clients is we do go back into the past and we try to figure out what went wrong and sort of and I call it the truth. I want you to give me the
Mm.
truth. And when I say the truth is, we all try to maybe mask the idea of, well, what you did wrong or they did wrong, or try to see what their problems were, what they did wrong, but forget to say, well, what did I do wrong? And, because there's two sides to it. As much as we want to say it's one person, it really isn't. It's two people involved in a marriage. So I believe that there's always something that in a relationship that two people contributed. And what is that? Not to say that there's a 50-50. It's not like that. But, there's always, like you said earlier, what is it that about us that we didn't really resolve even before the relationship. So that's an example of it, right? Is what's the truth? Find your truth and so you can help yourself move on. And how long after your divorce did it take you to get your life back on track?
Well, it's evolved over time. It definitely took me, oh gosh, Patricia, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years, right? Because I had to grieve my miscarriage. I had to grieve my marriage. I had to grieve my job. I was, starting a new private practice at the time, trying to figure out how to help my daughter, get myself reestablished financially. There was so many pieces and so many decisions to make. And ultimately for me, it also meant getting my health back on track, which was, a big part of it. So I would say my magic number here will probably be 5 years. But it's still going on. You're still living as a divorced person.
Yeah, once you're divorced, you're always divorced. Yeah.
Hmm.
People think, once they're divorced, they're not seeing anyone, they're considered single. You're not. You're actually still always divorced. But you're absolutely right about saying it. There's no timeline. Everybody needs to take time, and whatever that time is, it doesn't matter. I don't think anyone should rush into a relationship right away, as they call the rebound. I think they really need to just give themselves a bit of a break and take some time for themselves. So that's so, so important. So it's very valuable about what you're saying. So if there was one thing that you could have done differently, what would have that been in your life?
Well, in the grand scheme, Patricia, like if we really zoom out and look at the real big picture,
Mhm.
I would have done some work on myself before heading into this relationship. Because I think if I had a magic wand and I could change anything, I would have been more alert to my own like self-awareness and recognize that I was lacking some self-confidence and that it was going to like affect the decisions I was making in my relationships.
How old were
And I
you?
think of,
How old were you when you got
when
married?
I was 31.
Okay.
Yeah, was I 31? I'm doing the math here. Yeah, I was 31.
Mhm.
So, but, in my 20s and in my earlier life, I had developed some deep insecurities, especially in my relationships with men, particularly. And I remember going to a therapist in my mid 20s after a serious relationship ended, but it was very short-term therapy. It wasn't enough. And if I had a magic wand, I would have not just dealt with kind of the crisis of the breakup at that time. I would have looked for somebody to say, listen, um, that breakup was probably a signal to me of a bigger piece for me, or had an effect on me that I'm going to carry with me. And so I wish with all my heart I could have gone back and really done some work on myself, because I think my decisions about who I picked and how I dealt with that early dating issue, I would have been more confident to deal with it head on,
Mhm.
and then would have influenced my choices at that time. And I think it would have played out completely differently.
That's wow. It's very good to sort of reflect and go back and know all those things. Well, our last question, is there anything more you would like to tell us about your experience that you can offer someone else, just in life in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to remember to be hopeful about this story. I mean, the stats are still high. A lot of marriages are still ending. Sometimes they don't have to end. So people should, if especially if there's children involved, people should, do whatever they can to get the supports they need to bring some enlightenment or awareness to what's going on. But if it's too late and, that ship has sailed, then I think I just want to instill hope to your listeners that there really is life after divorce. And if you can't save your marriage, you can rebuild yourself and you can rebuild your life in a way that is almost better than maybe what was possible in your marriage. And you can be stronger, you can be happier, you can make healthier choices. And so it doesn't have to be the end of your life. It can in some ways be the beginning. It can be the one crisis you have in your life that makes the difference for the whole rest of your life. Maybe you'll stop making bad choices. Maybe you'll deal with conflict and intimacy better. Maybe it's the crisis that you needed to wake you up to like what you've been doing your entire life. And so it can be the most powerful thing that happens to you. And it doesn't have to be like the end of your life. In some ways, it could be the beginning.
I completely agree. Like that old saying is sometimes we have to hit rock bottom. And once we hit that rock bottom, we can rebuild again and build stronger. So you're absolutely right. And I agree with you there. Yes, we might have hit some, I call it the bad bump on the road, and after we get over that hump, well, then the road is smooth again. So, and you can start it all over. So,
Yeah,
well,
for me, it felt like there was this a huge sinkhole in the road. Like I'm driving along and then it's like the sinkhole, I can't even stay on the road.
yeah,
And turns out there's all these bridges, right?
yeah,
And it's a perfect highway.
yeah, there you go. Well, thank you again, Karen, for participating. And I really like to have other people join in the podcast because everybody's story that participated has their own experience they dealt with and what they were going through with the divorce. And they're so very valuable. And as I always say, remember, there is a life after divorce.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Patricia.
Yeah, thank you, Karen.